Hi, this is Bill Prater, and welcome to the Business Builder Show, where we feature champions in their respective industries from all over the globe. Our mission is to provide you with timely, provocative, and actionable resources that will inspire, promote, and accelerate your quest for business excellence. Today, we're going to find out why your LinkedIn profile must be a one-stop shopping experience. Joe Frankie III is going to walk us through that. Now, Joe is a West Point graduate and combat veteran who's had a full career in the U.S. Army as a warfighter and logician for 30 plus years. He commanded at all levels, platoon through installation. Now, he's taken that experience and parlayed it into his current situation, which is an author, coach, and search consultant, where he advises executives, transitioning military leaders, and students to better merchandise themselves by helping them build a LinkedIn bridge from where they are now to where they want to go in the future. Joe, it's going to be interesting figuring out exactly how you do that, my man. And so my first question is, who is it that you serve?
Okay, I've basically coached people as young as 14 years old and as old as 84. And as you can imagine, they both have different goals.
Yes.
So the 14-year-old wanted to get into a very exclusive private high school. The 84-year-old wanted to get back in the workforce. And so consequently, you end up serving everybody in between. But I would say the bulk of the people I work with are 40 plus year olds trying to figure out what is next.
So what problem is it that they actually has? Is it some sort of mental block? What can you give us an overview of the problem or problems that they have that you are able to solve, Joe?
What we have in a lot of cases is people are really good people. They just don't know how to merchandise themselves in today's environment in order to sell themselves in order to get what they want. And so if you're under merchandised, in other words, you're just going to be passed over. In other words, I'm an executive search consultant. We use LinkedIn extensively to find whoever the client has us to find. And you've got to be able to show up and you've got to be able to come up in those searches. So you're in peer competition with whoever your peer competitor is from the standpoint of what you bring to the table. And 10 years ago, the old way would I'd hear about you, I'd call you up, we'd have coffee, all that kind of stuff. But today, if you don't have a show ready profile that's advocating for you 24/7, 365, you get left behind. And there's no reason for that when you've paid your dues, you've done it. But if nobody can see it, you didn't do it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm thinking maybe a couple case studies would be helpful to our listeners. Maybe that 14-year-old, maybe the 84-year-old, or maybe something else that would be interesting in its own right.
If you can imagine, I can't get too specific with a 14-year-old because she's a minor and I've got two non-disclosure.
Okay. Yep. And she still is a minor then, it sounds like.
So anyway, but the bottom line is if you've done all these things, LinkedIn gives you the way to array all of these contributions that you've made so that they can be seen. In other words, when you first go out on LinkedIn in order to just get out there, you say, here's my name, here's my job, and okay, you've started a LinkedIn profile. Think of it in terms of, okay, they've issued you a skeleton. LinkedIn issues you a skeleton of who you are. And it's your job to put muscles, ligaments, and tendons all over the skeleton. But when you just put your name and who you are, you've just filled out the upper part of your face. And so what I'm advocating is populate the rest of your skeleton with muscle so that it works for you. because realistically, if you have a weak body, it doesn't compete well. And if you've done the work, you've been there, you got the merit badges, why in the world wouldn't you take credit for it? Because LinkedIn, in effect, is your billboard to the world. Do you want a small billboard or do you want a big billboard? You're in the driver's seat.
So I have been a LinkedIn user for a long time, and I know that there is a plethora of LinkedIn experts and so forth out there. So tell our listeners, Joe, how you and the way in the approach you take differs from the competition.
I think what this was came as an epiphany for me. What I learned was, okay, I spent 30 plus years in the Army. And so in the Army, as a leader, all you're doing is developing subordinates. In other words, you're trying to help your subordinate get to their next promotion. You're trying to help them get to their next school. You're trying to help them get to their next assignment, because all of those things are competitive in some form or another. And when I was a executive search consultant and started working with executives, what I found is a lot of executives didn't know how to merchandise themselves. In other words, they know how to make money for the company, knew how to do their job, but every time you go to a new position, say that's 3 or 4 years, guess what? Everybody moves your cheese in that time frame on how to do it the next way. And so the speed of business is increasing. Okay. That's not going backwards. So the old idea that you take 90 days for this full executive search and all of that kind of stuff, it's gotten to the point where people, hey, who can you send me? Who can, who have you got for me to take a look at? So that's been compressed, in my view, from about 90 days to about 3 weeks, about
Okay.
20 days, and even shorter in some cases. So consequently, you're either show ready, you showed up at the game with your cleats and stuff, because the coach is not going to put you in the game if you don't have your helmet and you don't have any shoes on.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So that's what happens to these people that are really prepared, but they just weren't prepared on LinkedIn. And whether we like it or not, LinkedIn is the major force in who you are to the outside world. And it's just like Dizzy Dean says, it ain't bragging if you've done it. So if you've done it, you need to make sure it's on your LinkedIn profile.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that you have 100% control over your LinkedIn profile, and it's just foolish and foolhardy almost not to seek some quality advice like the kind that you give people.
My experience comes from coach 729 people to date in the last 10 years. And that's everything from a career transition, career development, pivoting, people really wanting to go from one sector to another, people that want to start the entrepreneur route, but they need to stay with the corporate thing until they get things going, all the way down to helping people with salary negotiations. And I help a lot of women, believe it or not, I'm with, hey, nobody sees me for what I do at work. I'm not being considered for promotion. So part of this is being able to amplify who you are on your team so that the supervisory people making the appropriate decisions, you get seen for what you bring to the table.
That's interesting. So you're thinking that your own company would actually have a reason to go take a look at your LinkedIn profile for internal movements and promotions and things.
Yeah, I work mainly with individuals.
Right.
I've done a few things for the corporate world. What I've found is that when you put three people in a room, they're all three different. They've got three different goals. And I just don't found that productive. You can talk about LinkedIn and its importance. For example, I'm going out to one of the universities in October, and it's going to be one overall on what LinkedIn is, what they need to do as students to get their profile going, the data they need to capture so that you're not deciding at one point in time to, okay, now I got to look back. What did I do as a shift supervisor at McDonald's? keep some of the data as you're working and going through college because it's so much easier. And once you get used to that and do that, you can do that for once you get in the groove, you can maintain yourself. You understand the importance of it. The devil's in the details. Qualitative metrics matter and quantitative metrics trump qualitative. How many dollars did you save? What was the revenue? You increased this by what percentage? Because a lot of times people will list, these are my duties. And really, for somebody looking at you, they really don't care what your duties are. They really want to know, what did you produce for the company? And how do you measure your production? So if there's one thing I would say to people is you need to keep track of how you measure your production. There's a reason somebody's hired you for that particular position, and you're either fulfilling it, meaning that you're bringing 4x to the company in value, or they would eliminate the position.
Let's talk a bit about your business. How did you, what was you've said an epiphany earlier, but what was the major milestones, Joe, as you went about building your coaching consulting business?
When I got into the executive search business, it became apparent just not, I had been coaching on LinkedIn for 19 years. I've been using LinkedIn for 20 years, but most of it was just a ministry helping transitioning military people. Because when you get out of the military, you really don't know how to speak in hiring manager vernacular. You can say you did this in the military, but if nobody understands what you did, then the conversation's useless. In helping the LinkedIn gave a way for people to put stuff out there. You could actually coach them and say, hey, you could say this a little bit better because the hiring manager, he doesn't understand that you were a platoon sergeant of a petroleum transfer company. What he does understand is that you were responsible for 50 truck tractor trailers, 50 tractors. You had an operational readiness rate of this. You had so many customers within 100,000 square mile area. You
Right,
delivered.
that's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. Even the word like customer would be something that the military colonel wouldn't have in his brain, but that's exactly what they are, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. Whoever you're supporting, you have customers, especially if you're in the logistics business on the Army side, and if you're in the combat arms, your customer is the enemy, and you're going to service the enemy extremely well.
So what were maybe the top three lessons learned from your years now as a coach consultant?
Most people under merchandise themselves, mainly because they don't see that. In fact, I would say, Bill, that it's easier for you to help somebody else than it would be to help yourself. Because what I found over the years, it took me about the first 300 people, is that your subconscious gets in your way of helping yourself. And so what I've done is it takes about an hour and I've got to get you to see the world in a different way. And when that happens, then you see what you need to do. It becomes more apparent. It's just not this third party idea that just seems strange and uncultural.
Mhm.
And then with everybody, there are certain things they probably need to be doing from the mechanics of a LinkedIn standpoint. For example, they listed their duties. Okay, what were your contributions? What did you actually do for the company? Because that's what anybody that's a hiring manager, they're saying, okay, what did that person do? And as a search consultant, okay, I got to find out what they produce because the way I sell them to the client is say, hey, this person's already produced for this person over here, and they're the closest to that. And you really ought to take a hard look at this person and commit to an interview.
What would you say is holding your business back right now?
What's holding my business back is myself.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
So what I've chosen to do is
Right.
I've chosen to grow my business organically. And I tried for a little while some ideas with this whole lead thing and all this kind of stuff. And I just didn't think it served me well. And I've coached in 15 different countries now, and I really haven't advertised. So they have found me for the help. And so people are finding me based on my LinkedIn profile. So people are doing searches, looking for the help and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm not interested in growing significantly. My business, my growth occurred during COVID. In the space of about 6 weeks, my business tripled, and it's been up at that rate ever since that time. And people say, why did that happen? And I said, everybody that didn't ever plan to be out of work, that I was going to ride it in with the company, or they were happy and they were just going to take the normal promotions and go with the company, they ended up out of work. And so you get these 911 calls and say, hey, Joe, I've got two months severance and a house payment and 3 kids. They were 911 calls. And so they hadn't been keeping up with their LinkedIn profile and or their resume because they didn't see a need to. And I would tell every professional nowadays, you need to be ready 24/7, 365 with a LinkedIn profile, because building a LinkedIn profile when you desperately need it isn't good timing.
Right, right. Do you price your services? Is it a retainer? Is it a project oriented or a combination
It,
thereof?
it's a combination depending on what they need. Some people just need a person that wants help with salary negotiation. We either come to terms on how much help we're going to do or what have you. But if they're going to do the LinkedIn profile drill with me, then I do that turnkey, and we agree on terms. And what that looks like is about 2 to 3 hours on the front end. That first hour, got to turn your head inside out. And then the second hour is in how you need to apply LinkedIn's resources to your particular situation. And then they've got a whole bunch of homework to do. In other words, we go over the stuff they can sprint on, things they can do in an hour that'll make a difference. Then the rest of it, you got to settle into the marathon, and you work on it on a project basis. People say, how long is it going to take? And I said, how often you going to work on it? If you work on it pretty often, it's going to take a lot shorter time. But it's almost like doing a term paper on yourself. You build out your LinkedIn profile and let it work for you. And the other thing is, people say, hey, Joe, here's my resume. And I said, what am I going to do with that? It's my resume. And I said, the only reason a resume exists in today's world is it's a direct response to a job position. In other words, there's a job specification, position specification. You decide you want to compete for it. You create a one unique resume for that. So every resume is a unique construct for one particular application. Everything else that you do about you is on your LinkedIn profile. So your LinkedIn profile is a warehouse of everything you do. And people say, well, why do I need to have that out there? And I said, what's it going to hurt you? People are searching on LinkedIn all the time. So what if accidentally somebody found you and calls you up, Bill, hey, Bill, I did this search. You came up. I went through your profile from soup to nuts. I read every word, and we've been looking for you for about 2 years. And this is what we want you to do. We want to fall in love. We want to marry you. We want you to do this. The bottom line is, if nobody knows what you bring to the table, nobody can find you. And so what I'm saying is, the reason my business is such that it is, people are finding me based on my LinkedIn profile. There's a lot in my LinkedIn profile. And what I do is I do the LinkedIn profile work, career development work, transition work, branding, how to brand yourself. I do the executive search work. I don't chase it, but clients call me and say, hey, will you do this for me? And I will. I just don't chase the work. And then people call me and say, Joe, I've been through your projects on LinkedIn. You've already solved this problem for so-and-so. Would you consider red teaming this idea, blue teaming this idea with us? So it's regular consulting. So between all of those 4 or 5 venues, I'm usually active in one or more.
So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
The easiest way is via LinkedIn. So I have an open profile link, which means they can send me a direct message without having to pay for an in-mail. And so LinkedIn is where I live for the most part, because that's most of my work is in and around LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, Joe Frankie III out there on Twitter. And I'm on Facebook on the business side with the company JF3 Associates, LLC.
Okay, excellent. Okay, good. So tell me, what's one question that I didn't think of, therefore didn't ask you, that would give great value to our audience if they knew the question and heard the answer from you, Joe?
I think the biggest thing that people need to realize is you got to get out of your own way. You've got to get out of your own way because we're taught to have a lot of humility, and there's nothing wrong with
Mhm.
it. The challenge is it's just like Dizzy Dean said, it ain't bragging if you've done it. And so if you have the metrics on what you've done as far back as in high school, if you worked in high school, what you did in high school. In fact, I have made more money off my high school entry on LinkedIn than any other entry.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
and the reason for that, I think, is everybody goes back to the lowest common denominator and says, okay, is this guy like me? Did he? Because I have CEOs that contact me said I was an offensive center in high school. Hey, I did poetry interpretation in high school. So that's an icebreaker. That's not the real reason they want to talk to me. But my point is a conversation gets started.
That's very insightful. I got to confess, as I talked about before we started the interview, that I've used LinkedIn for quite some time, and I never even entered my mind to have high school experience in there. But now that you brought it up, I had some interesting things take place to me in high school
Well,
that
everybody's
that did go a long way to determine my a lot of my values, for example, came out of high school.
the same thing was for me. The family had family businesses, right? My grandparents had a restaurant operation. As a kid, we worked in the restaurant, and my aunt and uncle had a Phillips 66 service station. So I worked in the service station when you got old enough to fix tires and change oil and change points in trucks and charge batteries. So my point is, we've all had these experiences. And so in your high school entry, you have your activities and societies, but you have 1,000 characters to say whatever you want to say about high school. And I tell my clients, did anybody give you any fiscal accountability? So if you ran a cash register in high school, put it in there because I'm looking for, I get I get requirements. Hey, I want you to go back and where's the earliest this person was in charge of money? If you make it easy for me, you go to the front of the bus.
Very nice, Joe. That's great. I loved your experiences and your wisdom. That our listeners, I'm sure, are going to be getting a hold of you in bunches.
Hey, I'm out here happy to have an initial conversation with anybody.
Excellent. Okay, everybody. Now, in closing, let's focus on the single fact that our businesses do not become extraordinary in a single moment. Instead, they get there as a result of the owner first having, then broadcasting a vision for the future. Number two, having a system of management to execute that vision. And number three, using a high performance team and leveraging them. Now, you can find all those things for free. Just go to my YouTube channel at Business Mastery Pro. Thanks for listening. Joe, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us today.
It was a pleasure, Bill. Thank you.